Am I really back? Yeah, I'm back in, oh my God, so many more ways than one. I'm back after an embarrassing 3-month absence from this podcast. I'm back from another hemisphere, and I'll talk about that, an amazing trip I was just on, and so many other things, because the last 3 months have been tumultuous, challenging, incredible. Hang on, we got a fun ride here and a lot of catching up to do. Thanks for being with me. Let's go. It's Nothing But the Truth. I'm your host, Ramesh Nyberg, former homicide detective, current teacher and law enforcement trainer, and future world traveler. This is a nonpartisan, non-political, non-BS space where communication is cherished and no punches are pulled. If investigation in criminal justice is your thing and you like hearing things from maybe a different angle every so often, this is where you belong. Climb aboard. And thank you for climbing aboard and being aboard. It's been way too long, and I don't want to just dwell on the amount of time that's gone by, but 3 months has just really slipped completely through my fingers. And so for those of you who have expressed an interest in this podcast and have been listening loyally, I really appreciate you waiting, and your patience is much appreciated. And so a shout out goes out to several of my kudas. You know who you are, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in August. So it's been a crazy ride. I planned to do the next episode, this episode, back in May, and then again in early June, just before I left on my trip to India, and didn't do it. And the whole time I was thinking, geez, as soon as I get back, I am going to just jump onto the microphone and get this thing done. Well, what happened on my last day traveling back home from India, I got COVID. And as soon as I got home, I felt terrible, and I went and got tested. Sure enough, was positive, and had no impetus whatsoever for the last 3 days. Today, which is July 7th, I'm feeling significantly better, enough to at least be sitting here and doing this. And I didn't want to waste any more time. I've got some time to spend here today with you, and I wanted to get started. Yes, I was on another continent, in another hemisphere, on the other side of the planet, and it was a remarkable trip. And, this is not a travel podcast, but I do want to talk about a few things that are significant and relevant to the things that we always talk about here on Nothing But the Truth. From a criminal justice standpoint, I got to tell you that there was an epiphany of sorts when I was there. The place is just so different, and the mindset there of the citizens is totally different. And while I was there, right after I got there, the Dobbs decision came down, overturning Roe versus Wade. And of course, I was very keen to read about that, and I was on the internet a lot, reading about it and reading all of the different discussions and arguments and protests, and watching those on the internet. And it was, in a way, it was disheartening. I felt bad, like my country is in shambles and disrepair, and they're at each other's throats. And a couple of things happened that gave me a little bit of perspective. And I want to start this new podcast of it's not a new podcast of 2022, but it feels like it's the first one I'm doing in quite a while. I would like to start by giving you a little bit of a different perspective that maybe you may not have as an American. Because as an American, I was in Kolkata, India, which is up in the northeast section of the country. It's a city of 15 million people. It's a typical, and I don't want to say typical, okay, I shouldn't say typical. It's an Indian city, which means it's heavily overcrowded. There's a lot of poverty, and there's just a lot of things that we're not used to seeing as Westerners on a daily basis. But here I was watching all this stuff going on, and I couldn't help but think to myself, wow, I live in a country where we have this incredible freedom to go out and scream at each other and call our politicians names, whether that's justified or not. And I said this is a nonpartisan podcast, and it always will be. So regardless of what you think of the current president or the former president, that's really irrelevant in this conversation, okay? Completely irrelevant. What I do want to point out is this. I sat there in my in-laws' living room, and actually we were sitting on the bed in the bedroom. It's kind of a morning ritual that we have there. We all gather on their bed, and we have tea, and it's just a lovely time. And they were reading an article from the local newspaper there about a man who was arrested there in India. And he was arrested for speaking out against one of the political leaders of the state of West Bengal, where we were. And he was vehement about his criticism. And he called this woman, this prime minister of the state, he called her a name of some sort. And I don't even know what it was. But he got arrested for it. And he got charged with speaking out against the state. And he got charged with a crime called, literally the name of this crime is, quote, hurting religious feelings. That's what he was charged with, hurting religious feelings. Now, you guys know where I'm going with this, right? I'm going to draw a parallel. And when I heard this, I thought, wow, how can this government that escaped British tyranny, fought for their independence so hard, as we did so many hundreds of years ago, to escape British tyranny and have the ability to form our own government and have our own freedoms and protections from tyranny, how can they engage in this, what I see as tyrannical behavior? And it made me appreciate all the frustration and all the angst and all the protest and all of the, if you even want to say hatred, that's going on in the United States that I was watching over the Dobbs decision and over gun control and over all these things that were happening. It made me realize, wow, at least we have the freedom to go out into the streets and point at our political leaders, point at each other and say, you suck, or you're this, or you're that, without getting arrested, without the government getting involved and telling us what we can say and what we cannot say. And for all of our faults, and we have many here in the U.S., for all of our faults and for all of our shortcomings and all of our division that we're experiencing, and I have some points to make about that too. For all of those things, we at least have the freedom to go out and try and correct it, or try and at least air our grievances with each other, with our politicians. And if it gets nasty, and if it gets, quote unquote, offensive, so be it. The Constitution has upheld our ability to be nasty, to be offensive. And as long as we're not being subversive and violently overturning the government or violently threatening or hurting somebody else, we're allowed to do that. Free expression and free speech is almost absolute until the point where you start storming the steps of the Capitol and destroying things and hurting people. Now, I'm not making a political statement there. I'm just telling you that you cannot deny that's what happened, because it is on video from 1,000 different angles, and we've all seen it 1,000 different times. That's where free speech ends. That's where protest, legal protest, the legal right to assemble and address your grievances, that's where that ends, is where you start smashing the windows of the Capitol. It's a perfect explanation and demonstration of the limitations and boundaries of our First Amendment rights and protections. Okay, enough about that. So that was the one thing that kind of really struck me while I was over there was this is a country, India I'm talking about, was a country of a lot of different beauty and a lot of grace, and the people there are just very, very sweet and hospitable and wonderful people, and they all would just drop whatever they're doing to help you. Even if you're a stranger on the street, they will help you. I'm not so sure that happens in the U.S. Maybe some places in the U.S. it does happen. But they do have their struggles. They are still trying to emerge, and of course they are. India is called an emerging nation, an emerging democracy, and they are having their struggles and conflicts with that, as we have had over the course of the evolution of our nation. We have had similar struggles, and they've only been a country since 1947. It's not a long time. They're still a baby globally when it comes to the development of a democracy. And there are a lot of lessons to be learned. I'm not saying that they will or should reach a model that is reflective of the United States, for example. But I think they have some journeys to make. I think they need to get over this idea that the government should tell people how to speak, and that the government should punish people for criticizing the government. So another thing happened while I was there, and we were sitting there again having tea one morning, and it's a different environment. There are vendors that walk the streets that come on carts and bicycles, and they sell vegetables and fish, and they call out. It's very old world that way, right? You can literally buy vegetables and food from your doorstep because they come to you. They come out selling these things, and it's very charming, really, to experience that. But what also happens is the politicians there will affix loudspeakers to a vehicle and go driving through the neighborhoods and blaring their political messages and their vote for me campaign ideas and concepts, and that echoes throughout the neighborhood. And I found it very annoying as a Westerner that's used to, what do we cherish as Westerners in our residential neighborhoods? We want them quiet, sanitized, peaceful. We don't want people driving around making noise in our residential neighborhoods. Well, in India, noise is part of the whole scene. It's just the background of everyday life. And so I asked my father-in-law, I said, what would happen if somebody went to them and said, look, we have no problem with your particular message, but is there another way you can do it? Can we not have these loudspeakers blaring in here when we're just trying to have a quiet morning of tea and biscuits to start our day? Why do we have to listen to this? And he said that would never work. He said if those people were aligned with the current government that's in place, you would likely get arrested for speaking out against the government. And I said, well, again, I'm not, my goal is not to criticize their message. And he stopped me and he said, it wouldn't matter. It would be construed as that. They wouldn't trust that you were just talking about a noise problem. They wouldn't understand your complaint about a noise problem anyway, because nobody complains about noise there. So this was a real learning experience for me. It was something that I had to try and see as, this is just a different culture, and this is what people are used to. And that's kind of the scary thing when I think about my in-laws living there and, my wife's family living there, and they're so used to that they themselves will not speak out against the government because they know that's, that could lead to legal ramifications. It could lead to incarceration. And incarceration, I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole with India's criminal justice system, but incarceration there is quite different than incarceration here. Which leads me to how their system of police and their legal process kind of works. And I'm not an expert on it by any means, but I think the most striking thing about the difference between Indian law enforcement and American law enforcement, for me as a former law enforcement officer, is that citizens don't really have the ability to call up the police. I mean, they can call the police, but, to make it a scenario-based situation here, you have a complaint. Maybe you have someone acting crazy outside your house or something like that. You pick up the phone here in the United States, you call the police and you say, hey, I've got a problem here. I think this guy is going to be violent, or I don't know what's going on. I need you to come out. And they will come out. The police will come out, right? Police car, maybe one or two police cars will show up. Uniform officers will come over, ask you what's going on, investigate the situation. Well, that doesn't happen in India. If you want to make a police report, you have to go to the police station and file your police report. If there's some sort of violent situation going on, the police are going to pretty much figure that you and your neighbors are going to take care of it. This is a society without guns. People don't have guns here. Now, there might be some black market guns in the organized crime areas, but this is not very common, especially in some of these suburban neighborhoods. But the average citizen simply does not own a gun there. So a violent person might be some idiot that's just acting crazy, and the police are pretty much, hey, go beat him up. And when he's incapacitated, call us, and we'll drag his ass to jail. Don't bother us now. We're not coming out there to investigate anything. So that's the deal. Now, I've simplified it, and I'm sure that if there's a major crime, if there's a murder or something like that, then maybe the police response is different. But this is what's been explained to me. There's a lot to chew on here from a criminal justice aspect. And again, I'm not in any way, shape, or form saying that the United States has the perfect answer to things like this. But I just did want to demonstrate, especially for my students, my Coral Reef students that are listening, that First Amendment issue was a big one. Because here's what we did in class. One of the last things we did before the end of the school year was I gave everyone a little exercise to do, and that was look at the Bill of Rights. I gave them 4 amendments, and I believe I gave them the 1st, 4th, 5th, and 14th amendments. I think something like that. And I said, okay, so and I think the 6th Amendment was one of them. I said, all right, you have to eliminate one. Which one do you drop? And some people said the 4th Amendment. Some people said the 6th. And then the second question was, which one of these amendments will you keep if you can only keep one? Which one would it be? And I would say to a student, and this is in 6 different classes, everyone, just about everyone that I can remember said they would keep the First Amendment. That was the most precious amendment to everyone. They would not give up their right to free expression, their right to choose their religion or not choose a religion, their right to their protection from the government of having any religious involvement in the government. And so, this harkens back to this story of this guy who spoke out against a political leader and apparently said something about religion and was charged with hurting religious feelings. Pretty remarkable from an American standpoint to hear something like this. There's so much more to talk about, and the experiences I had in India were wonderful. I don't want you to think that I was scared to walk out in the streets. On the contrary, the neighborhood was very, very safe. It didn't look that way. Again, from my Western sensibilities, going through there, everything looked kind of in disrepair. Lots of people hanging out on the street at night. But that's just the way their society is. Everybody likes to congregate at night and go to these food stands where there's street food all over the place, and it's fantastic. It's delicious. And that's how they feel connected, is to be with each other. because they have no choice. You got 15 million people in the city jammed into, comparatively a small area. And so you have no choice but to be connected to people. And it wasn't a threatening thing at all to go out and see these folks, a lot of young men hanging around outside a store. And you might think, well, okay, this doesn't look safe. It is safe. It's very safe. In fact, if you had a problem, these people would come and help you. I hope that this first episode back was somewhat enlightening, or somewhat at least thought-provoking. It felt great for me. I'm going to pretty much wrap it up here because I don't want to get too much into anything else, and I wanted to just kind of make this my connection, my reconnection with you, and kind of jump back into this thing. This is not going to be heavily edited, so you'll forgive all the ums and ahs. I'm just getting through COVID and getting my voice and my stamina back here. So I appreciate you listening. And gosh, should I promise that we won't ever have a 3-month absence again? I am going to promise that. 3 months is just excessive. It's unacceptable. And thanks for coming back and listening. I'm going to do my level best to knock another episode out next week. And if you'd like to hold me to that, send me an email or go on the Nothing But the Truth Facebook page and send me a message. That's fine. In the meantime, take care of yourselves, and remember, always put your best foot forward, but don't forget to work on your other foot. Take care.